Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dungeons & Dragons. And we're going to talk about the hierarchy of Dungeons & Dragons participation and how there's one person in the world who has recently reached the highest pinnacle of Dungeons & Dragons participation. And I want to talk about that. So, we now, February 20, the Dungeons & Dragons history is divided into two phases. It's divided into February 22nd, 2022 and before, and February 23rd, 2022 and after, right? So our world is right now in this unique moment where, you know, from a Dungeons & Dragons perspective, you know, a year from now, are we all playing, you know, with all our miniatures on the wall on a shelf? Or are we all playing Dungeons & Dragons, you know, out of a wooden box that sits at the bottom of a go bag, and we're playing, you know, and we're setting a watch, right? We're playing our Dungeons & Dragons game is going to be interrupted, right? You know, as we sit under a tarp under a mountain in the rain, and somebody's saying, "Hey, who's..." And when you say in your Dungeons & Dragons game, "Let's set the watch," it reminds you to literally set your real world watch, you know, so that you get through the night safe, right? Because you're going to split your night of sleep because you don't know what's coming over the hill, IRL or in the game, right? That's the new world that's been handed to us by one person, right? One man, right? Joe Biden said that what happened on February 23rd were unprovoked and unjustified attacks. I 100% agree with that. And it split our Dungeons & Dragons pool. We don't know what's coming next, right? But we need to prepare for both. But one of the things that this brings forward is it helps us to be thankful to the incredibly new, important participants within Dungeons & Dragons that have reached the pinnacles of the Dungeons & Dragons participation hierarchy. Let's walk it through. What is the hierarchy? Okay, here we go. So the lowest is the player, the Dungeons & Dragons player. Okay, it's the lowest level of commitment, and it's where you should enter. I did not enter as a Dungeons & Dragons player. I entered actually as a dungeon master. The reason why I entered as a dungeon master was I witnessed Redbox game, and I asked if I could play, and they said no. And so then I had to get my own Redbox and read it and start with my own players that I was able to scrabble together. But ideally, you start at the lowest hierarchy as a player, then you go to Dungeon Master. What's after Dungeon Master? Well, first of all, those two layers, and there's beginning career Dungeon Master, mid-career Dungeon Master, late-career Dungeon Master, right? At any level from Dungeon Master, you can then, so you have those two first tiers, right? After those, you can then graduate to Dungeons & Dragons Game Designer, right? Now, this is incredibly rare. Very few people reach this level, ever, right? And there have been lots of Dungeons & Dragons game designers. A good example is Chris Perkins, right? That's exactly the level he's gotten to. He's gotten to game designer, and actually, and you know what? Actually, he's a little higher than that. He's a senior designer. So there's Dungeons & Dragons designer, then there's Dungeons & Dragons senior designer, right? And that senior level designer, that is incredibly high up on the mountain, right? That is incredibly high up the hierarchy, right? There's a guy from Paizo who was just hired, right? You should have seen, go over on the Twitter and look at the guy from Paizo that they hired as a senior designer, right? Boy, oh boy, he throws a lot of shade at Paizo. I was like, wow, okay, Paizo got you there, and you're gonna throw that much shade at him on your way out? Yeah. But it's a big deal, and you could tell, by this long thread, that he understands this is a crown of honor that is being set upon his head. I was happy to see that he understood how important it is for him to be named as a Dungeons & Dragons senior designer. Next, there is a lead designer, right? There's only been, I think there's been 6 of these. Mike Morales was the last. Rob Hainsu is in there. Jonathan Tweed is in there. Gary Gygax himself is in there. You know, you have these lead designers, right? So that is the pinnacle, except that is the penultimate hierarchy. Okay? That's the second to the top. What is the top? The top of the Dungeons & Dragons participation hierarchy, in my humble opinion, is the prescient designer. The prescient designer. The Dungeons & Dragons prescient designer, okay? This title does not exist, right, on any contract, but it 100% exists in IRL. There are only 2 people in the entire world who have reached this hierarchy level of Dungeons & Dragons. There's Gary Gygax. He was a prescient designer. What does it mean to be a prescient designer? Gary Gygax saw the first 2 nuclear weapons that were detonated. Like, he was here, IRL, right? In his lifetime, he was aware of the first nuclear detonations, right? He lived through World War II. He lived through the Korean War. He lived through the Vietnamese War. He lived through two of the darkest moments in human history when nuclear weapons were used, right? He saw all of it, and he made Dungeons & Dragons, in my humble opinion, he's the first to do prescient design. He looked at what was going to happen in the future. He predicted it, right? And then he used what would be needed by humanity and placed it into the game, right? And that's why, in my humble opinion, today, Unbound Identity and Unbound Immersion are so important in Dungeons & Dragons game, and why the entire game serves as a human improvement engine, right? For the human intellect, for human empathy, right? And for human evolution, right? For us to intellectually evolve, right? For us to emotionally evolve. That's what Dungeons & Dragons is, because of Gary Gygax's prescient design. Who is the second, and only the second, Dungeons & Dragons prescient designer? It's Amanda Heyman. What did she do to become only the second Dungeons & Dragons prescient designer in the history of the game? I'll tell you what she did. She created Strixhaven. And she created it exactly when it needed to be created. Exactly with what was needed, right? So, there's this 2 Dungeons & Dragons world, right? 2 states right now, right? Are we going to be playing with miniatures on the shelf a year from now? Or are we going to be playing under a tarp on a mountain where rain falls after an 8-mile hike? Because we have to be on the move constantly, gathering food, and, can't be in one place, right? Because it's too dangerous. Which state will we be in, right? Well, guess what? If we are in the first state and we're in the miniatures on the wall, we need what? And right now, this week, right? I'm running Strixhaven this week. My second session of Dungeons & Dragons Strixhaven this week, right? And you know what's wonderful? You know what's really special about Dungeons & Dragons Strixhaven? More than almost any other book, it highlights the social interaction pillar. It highlights the exploration pillar, right? And it ramps down, it de-escalates the combat pillar. How did Amanda Heyman know that right now, in February of 2022, we would need a version of Dungeons & Dragons that would give us a break from the combat? We would need a specifically timed book, right, for Dungeons & Dragons that would give us a break from the combat pillar, because the horrors of the IRL would not allow us to engage in the same way with the horrors of the fantasy world. How did she know, right? How did she do this prescient design, this predictive design, right? It's a good question, right? Now, there's one of 2 ways. One, she's absolutely purely brilliant, and she saw what Gary did, and then she did it consciously, right? However, it's possible she did it subconsciously, right? And the reason why she might have done it subconsciously is she has been in the tabletop role-playing game industry for a long time. She's very aware of everything Gary Gygax did, right? You don't make it to the Dungeons & Dragons design team at all if you don't know who and what Gary Gygax is, right? And so, and he set this echoing presence of, hey, it's not enough to design a game. You need to be looking at what state humans will be in the future. And boy, were there a lot of clues that we'd be right here, right? So, Amanda Heyman, her book, Strixhaven, was important on February 22nd. It's 10 times more important on February 24th. Once it shows that Amanda Heyman is Dungeons & Dragons' only second prescient designer. Designing not just a tabletop role-playing game, right? But an aid to the human soul, right? An aid to every single dungeon master and dungeon player saying, I understand the pillars of what are in the game, but I also understand that some pillars are going to need to be de-escalated, and some pillars are going to need to be escalated, right? Some pillars need to be made more important. Some pillars need to be made less important at specific points in time. And knowing that 6 months, 12 months, 18 months ahead to make sure that what we need now is in the game, unbelievable. Unbelievable. There you go. The hierarchy of Dungeons & Dragons participation. Prescient design done by Gary Gygax. Prescient design done by Amanda Heyman. Thank you, Amanda Heyman, for creating for making sure Dungeons & Dragons was ready for this horrific IRL moment that we're in right now. Thank you.